Plain Truth, a show where we talk about some of the mysteries, anomalies, and a little bit of geopolitics in the world around us. I'm your host, Plain, and with me this week on the ride is my friend Oolong Rabbit and our special guest, Rosa Koire, who's quite well known for her work in trying to expose Agenda 21. Rosa, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Well, thank you much for coming. How about we start with you talking about how you got into this, and then you can also give us a little information about your resources, your website, and such.
Great. Well, by profession, for many years, I was a commercial real estate appraiser specializing in eminent domain valuation in the United States. I was a district branch chief for the Department of Transportation. And while doing that work, valuing people's property for acquisition, I found that there was a planning revolution going on. And while I was researching that, I was realizing that people literally could not just go into a planning department and get permits to use their property. And in fact, it seemed as if the government was there to stop people from using their property, as it was zoned even. So while I was checking that out, I started to find that it wasn't just in the San Francisco Bay Area where I was based. It was in fact all over California and all over the United States. And as I was to discover later, it's worldwide. This is United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development. And although most people think of the United Nations as some sort of benevolent, peacekeeping, sort of worldwide, purposeful agency or entity that's there to preserve safety and security around the world. In fact, it's a framework to assist in the creation of one world governance. And through my research and through personal experience, I found that it's not just something that's out there in the ether, it's right down in your neighborhood, no matter what city you're in, state, nation, it's all across the world. And so my work has been about exposing that, because awareness is the first step in the resistance, and there is worldwide nonpartisan resistance against this one world globalization. So that's what I'm about, and our websites are postsustainabilityinstitute.org and Democrats Against UN Agenda 21.com. And I've also written a book called Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21. And that book is available all over on Amazon and Kindle and all of the usual places.
Okay, well, thank you. It seems like this issue is gaining traction around the world. I mean, you just recently went to Europe, right? What was your reception over there?
I went specifically to speak at an international conference in Denmark, the Open Mind Conference, and I traveled through Europe because I wanted to see how United Nations Agenda 21 was implemented in different countries. And the way we see it mainly, of course, in the United States, we see it as a land use plan. We see it through smart meters, through water and land restrictions, through our educational systems, social engineering, and of course, surveillance and restrictions on our ability to move freely. And this is the same across the world, just with different, it's got a different face on it depending on where you are, but, and it's, different parts of it have progressed more fully in different places, but that's essentially what you're seeing all across the world.
Well, let's see, when did you notice this, by the way, when you were doing appraisal work for government acquisition or whatever? How long ago was that, and how has it changed since then?
Mm-hmm. Well, I began to notice it in 2002. And if I can just backtrack so that, people have a general sense of, what I'm really talking about, I'll just say also my background. Of course, I was an expert witness. In my career, I was required to do research in order to be able to defend whatever my position was in a legal situation. So I'm used to doing deep research. And in around 2002, I found that that there was a planning revolution, that land use had changed radically, and what I didn't realize was that in 1992, the United States and 178 other countries had signed on to a United Nations agreement called Agenda 21, the Agenda for the 21st Century. And that is the action plan to inventory and control all land, all water, plants, minerals, construction, means of production, education, energy, and human beings in the world, everyone. It's an inventory and control plan. So that was agreed to by all of our countries in 1992. And then our countries went back to their individual congresses or cabinets or whatever, and they implemented it. And that's, you'll see that Agenda 21 is a non-binding agreement. Well, that's true, but then all of these countries went back and made it binding within their own nations. And in the United States, George H.W. Bush agreed to it, and then Clinton created the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And that was a cabinet level, those were cabinet level secretaries on that council, along with the captains of industry, and mainly energy, like Enron and PG&E and BP, and also the environmental groups. And that was what this is essentially about, is about globalization, and that is the standardization of all systems. So when I was seeing it as land use plans being systematically harmonized across the nation in the United States. Regionalization is what this is about, because when you have city, county, state, and federal, you elect all of those positions. But Agenda 21 is global, regional, neighborhood, and you don't have a voice that is not representative. So what it does is it erases jurisdictional boundaries, and it creates these unelected boards and commissions that then actually regulate how it is that you live your life. And this is implemented all across the world, whether you're in the United States or Europe or wherever you are, Australia, the Far East. It's an international plan to regionalize the world. And regionalization, as Zbigniew Brzezinski said in 1995, is the stepping stone, essentially, to genuine globalization, because that's the only way that you can incrementally erase those local, state, and national boundaries, is through regionalizing. And that's what we're seeing now all across the world.
Well, I'm a big fan of Brzezinski. I mean, where else can one start? He's got great books to figure out what they're up to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they always tell you what they're doing. It's very easy to see.
Well, then I have a different related question. Okay, so we see this from the early 90s, mid 90s. But in a sense, you might disagree with me, but I think that in a sense was the heyday of globalization. And that since then, I don't know what you want to call it, the challengers to the system, not necessarily benevolent challengers, but those who don't want to go along for one reason or another, seem to be getting stronger. Just more obviously, I mean, we can see what some call the New World Order kind of system hitting the wall. I mean, they haven't been able to get their wars in the Middle East, and they're, losing control of Egypt and various other things. Is it possible that, when you talk about the early 90s, you're talking about after the Soviet Union had collapsed and there wasn't much to stop the U.S. from just doing what it wanted with brute force around the world. And maybe the other countries are getting organized now. You see Brazil saying, we want an NSA-proof phone and internet system, things like that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this?
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Well, okay, so taking your premise that the rise came up with the fall of the Soviet Union, and that after that period was kind of the period of unrestricted hegemony by the United States as the sole superpower. As I said, globalization is the standardization of systems. Now, what that really means, what standardization means is uniformity in systems. And what systems are is essentially it's all systems: law enforcement, energy, land use, every aspect of your life is involved in a system. So if you're talking about, for instance, law enforcement, you're talking about full surveillance capability. Now that is expanding all across the world. And that's through harmonization, fusion centers. It's through complete loss of control of your personal data, in fact, your biometrics, the ability to identify you no matter what you're wearing or where you are, through just the movement of your body, the loss of control of your own, what makes you, your DNA. All of this is part of the standardization of all systems. The National Defense Authorization Act, the USA Patriot Act, this through these, through the two shock and awe systems that have changed the world are the global warming story and 9/11. So basically, we're being terrorized and we're being socially engineered. Now, this has only accelerated in the years since, since Agenda 21 was agreed to. And I don't say that it all started with Agenda 21, but it is codified and consolidated through Agenda 21 because the design of it is capacity building to the lesser developed countries. And what this is essentially is it's a global corporate totalitarian state being erected around us. And corporate mega corporations are looking for full, open, unrestricted movement of goods, no problem with wage issues or production. And what they want to do is bring up lesser developed countries' ability to purchase their goods while kind of collapsing the ability of the more developed countries to demand higher wages. And that's exactly what we're seeing with artificial scarcity and collapse of the more developed countries throughout the EU and North America. And of course, the world. So this, I completely disagree with you if you're thinking that globalization is slowing down. In fact, it's accelerated greatly, and it's being implemented, with all speed possible through the mega corporations' infiltration into our educational system, our law enforcement, our government. We are seeing a fascist state, and because people don't see tanks rolling down their street unless they're in, the more so-called unstable nations, then, they think nothing's going on. That is very far from the truth. This is why our economies have collapsed.
Well, first of all, I obviously agree that the Western world is turning into a fascist system. There's no question about that. I wasn't really questioning that. I think they've put it, basically they've floored it. The pedal in the car is now, as far down as it's going to go, as far as globalization goes. The question I was pointing out, though, is I think there's a lot of resistance around the world. And as I'm saying, it's not exactly benevolent resistance.
Well, I think if you're talking about what happened in Egypt or what's happening, the Syria, all of this destabilization of nations, and then the movement towards more, essentially more controllable dictators is the perfect setting for one world government, because it's far more efficient to deal with one individual than it is to deal with an entire nation of people who are expecting to have a vote that matters in representative government. So, especially, trade agreements, the EU started with a trade agreement. It was a coal and gas agreement that, essentially morphed into, a single superpower entity. And, I know it's not a fully integrated yet, but that's the goal. And we're looking at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is maybe on fast track. That's the goal for it. But and also at the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is the U.S. and the EU. So what I'm seeing is that the goal is absorption of the sort of fringe states into the major regional entities, so that they can whatever their mineral wealth is can be absorbed into the larger powers, and ultimately to be exploited by the mega corporations, which is ultimately this is who's running everything: the World Bank, the IMF, major corporations, and the huge foundations.
Well, perhaps on the bright side, we can say that I think, you may disagree, but I think the West is basically sinking, if not sinking fast. And so...
I don't understand what you mean by the bright side, if you're talking about that. What do you mean?
Well, I'm joking, and I'm being facetious, but what I'm trying to say is the goal that they want is going to be hard to... Well, I mean, Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard. I mean, whoever controls Eurasia is going to control the world. And I think the U.S. policy there has basically failed. And now this change in dealing with Iran is an example of that. And China and Russia are going to be in far, far stronger position dealing with that. And they're building all these fast trains and superhighways and pipelines. And this is going to make it so I'm unfortunately, America or whatever, Canada or Ireland will be in trouble. But I'm just pointing out that they may not have the same ability to put their force in places like Brazil that they used to. But let's go back to your what you saw in Europe. What was the response of the people there? What did you talk about?
Well, what I was seeing there, first of all, the conference, the Open Mind Conference, which I can recommend for people, they'll have that up on YouTube, and it was very interesting. Some of the issues were GMO, genetic engineering, and EMF, other issues that I think are all tied in with globalization and Agenda 21. But what I saw as I went through Europe were video cameras. I saw sort of a resurgence all over. I saw a resurgence of a sort of militarism combined with a kind of apathy and a sense that, outside of the touristic areas, there was kind of a sort of a grayish pall. And that is, sort of the vestigial in the Eastern nation, in the Eastern countries. There's kind of a vestigial sense of, of the Soviet, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and you can see it in just that kind of dingy kind of feeling of, gasping for recovery. And then in the, further west, there's kind of a giddy, extreme feel of acquisitiveness, but I didn't see that that people were very conscious. My sense was that, much as you see across, in other parts of the world, the people who are awake and aware are definitely in the minority, and many people are just interested in managing to keep their standard of living as high as they can, and especially when you're creating sort of artificial scarcity, it creates a dependence on government. And when you withdraw that support, when government withdraws that support, then you have that kind of chaos that you have in that we saw in Greece, and then you open your country up for bidders like Ireland or other nations that are just looking desperately for any kind of investment. So what Agenda 21 is a great leveler, and it levels the developed nations, and it brings up the lesser developed nations, but not to a point where they're able to have like a high quality of life. Instead, it's designed to create a low-wage economy that is kind of the Walmartization of the world. And that is, that's kind of that pressure that you see. There's a desperation to hold on to whatever people have, and also a sense that, for those in Eastern Europe, that it's kind of a Wild West feeling.
I was wondering, Rosa, do you think that this ties in with depopulation?
I do. I think that, especially with the issue of smart meters, of GMOs, of any kind of thing that's questionable, because Agenda 21 is one of the elements of Agenda 21 is the precautionary principle, which says that when there's a question of whether something is a danger to the population or to the environment, that one should err on the side of caution and restrict whatever that action is. But that only applies to those who who are not the ones who are running these things. And in fact, if there obviously there is concern, deep concern around the world regarding GMO and smart meters, EMF. But if they were going to enact that principle fully, they would not have deployed smart meters across the world. There are countries, there are very few places where there aren't smart meters, which are radio frequency meters. And GMO is being, is talked about, but there are very few places where it's being restricted. So I think that this is going to definitely have an effect, an impact on our health. And the other aspect of this that's important is, in providing health insurance, like in the United States, all of our records here are being digitized. And what Agenda 21 essentially is it's about information sharing and data collection, about big data. So that's how you lose all control of what it is that protects you in this world from predators, from either cyber predators or predators in the physical world who would take your either take your health or take your identity or take your life. And so with the rise of technocracy, we're seeing that control over populations is far more possible than it ever has been before. And this is definitely a concern that is, of course, coupled with United Nations Agenda 21.
Are you at all familiar with the Georgia Guidestones?
I am, yeah.
I think on one of the Guidestones it actually recommends a world population of 500 million.
Yeah, I don't know who did those stones, and it's not really having a big bearing on anything for me. I don't know who erected those stones, and it's, who knows. But I think that the idea of running a world, what we're talking about is the ultimate in efficiency. This is what the Nazis were not able to do, but they tried to do, which is to have full and complete total control and full knowledge and information of everything, total surveillance, total information. And of course, this is a continuation of that Nazi plan. And in fact, many of the same players are involved with sustainable development as were involved with Nazi Germany, like Siemens Corporation, IBM, General Electric, General Motors. These are all companies that either were German or were collaborating fully with the Nazis, and they are now fully involved in implementing sustainable development through biometrics or control of water, smart meters, high-speed rail, all of these factors that are fully implemented through United Nations Agenda 21.
So you think it's more of a fascist plan than, say, a communist plan?
Well, I think what we're seeing, of course, is the takeover by the corporations. And corporations have to show a profit. And in fact, they're totally profit driven. So they want full efficiency so that they only have to deal with, the perfect situation for a corporation is to just deal with one individual. When you're breaking into a market, you don't want any competition. So it's about taking out all competition and about capacity building. So that's developing markets and also keeping wages low and reducing any kind of regulation or restriction, erasing boundaries and borders. So whether it's communism, the communism on the face of it, is about controlling and owning everything and having, supposedly the happy experience of everyone just taking, what they need from the, the great collective. But in this case, we're talking about communitarianism. This is the plan of that we saw through the Nazi era as well, which is you can keep your land, but you own your land for the sole purpose of benefiting the common good. And so you can manage your land, you can pay for your land, you can take all the risks for the development of your land, but ultimately all of that needs to be in the service of the greater good as defined by your rulers. And that is the plan that is being implemented.
Do you see any success in fighting this in different, because really what you're talking about is technocracy, really. It's not just Agenda 21, as you said, it's other things, GM foods and other things. What successes can we learn from around the world, do you think?
Well, I think that, if people are listening to this, I think, this is something that all of us have a duty to preserve freedom. And freedom's not just, you could say, as Janis Joplin, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Well, just think about it, This is a real thing. It's not just some word up printed on, or waving around with a flag or something. This is real. We're talking about the total loss of everything that allows us to live as freely as we do, no matter where we live. Now it's going to be more restricted, and it is in effect right now. What I'm seeing is, of course, since I've been out speaking about this for several years, the last several years, and my book was a bestseller on Amazon. It's been very popular. And other people are out there speaking about it. The awareness around the world has grown, but everyone has to do more. This isn't just something that you can hear about and just think that you can go back to your, turning on TV or hanging out or whatever you're doing. It's not really like that. This situation is like, if you can imagine living through Nazi Germany and thinking that you yourself would have probably been in the resistance. That's how you think of yourself as a person who would have fought it. Well, this is the opportunity now. You're not going to see it as tanks rolling down the street. You need to get up, stand up, speak out, take this on as an individual. We've created flyers. This doesn't sound very cool, but when was the last time you opened up your front door and found a flyer down there on your porch step that gave you the bottom line on what was going on in the world and around you in your town? It's important that we give this information to people because people don't know. There are a lot of people, of course, who don't want to know, and those are people who you just don't want to bother with. What you want to do is talk to people and explain this information and share this information with people who can hear you, because we don't need everyone to stand up against this. We just need a very powerful, strong core group of people, and that's what we're growing around the world. So I really encourage people, of course, to check it out on our websites, postsustainabilityinstitute.org, and Democrats against UN Agenda 21.com. And then, of course, check out my book, Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21. This is treason. We're looking at, at something that is literally taking over our educational systems. It's in every aspect of our lives. And I'm not a doomsdayer type person. What I am is a researcher and someone who's speaking the truth. So what I'm saying is that it's time now to take this on, to recognize that whatever you call this, whatever aspect of this that you find that resonates for you, you need to speak out. There's no more sitting on the sidelines.
Can you suggest something for those who, I guess, have the chance to attend the meetings, or maybe they're in somewhat environmentally oriented groups or something? In other words, some people, of course, think that laws are necessary. You know, we need stricter environmental protection and so on and so forth. And so they've kind of been co-opted into the system. Can you suggest what they might do to try to make things move in the right direction?
Well, I want to say I'm not an anarchist myself, and I think very few women would be, just because anarchy basically is survival of the fittest, and it's not too likely that a smaller woman is going to ever be the most, the fittest. Just throwing that out there, but the what needs to be done, obviously, I personally considered myself to be an environmentalist. My a general contractor. She built a whole 2-story house out of recycled materials. We recycle and reuse everything. I very seldom get anything new, but it's not really about thinking about the environment in those terms. That is why I called my book Behind the Green Mask, because it's easy. It's very easy to use green and the concept of conservation and environmentalism to move whole groups of people into a point of view where, like my neighbor says, and he says this with a straight face, that he would be a fascist for the environment. So when you give people that sense that the world is being destroyed and they are the cause, they might be a lot more willing to go along with very restrictive movements that or with issues that they never would have agreed to before. This is, this is really what communitarianism is. It's the third way. It's the Hegelian dialectic, where you've got thesis, antithesis, and then your sort of your balance in between. And if you use a point of view like that, you can move people from white to black in just a few steps. So if you're concerned about the environment, that's great. Who doesn't want to have clean air and clean water and to continue to leave the world for generations to come? The thing you need to do, though, is to not be swayed by rhetoric and to get more information and to always read. Very few of us are scientists, climate scientists. In order to have a full understanding, you need to read a lot of different points of view, because we're being indoctrinated. Social engineering and behavioral modification are running through all aspects of our education. So, you're being indoctrinated pre-kindergarten all the way to postgraduate school in sustainable development principles. And this is a manipulation. This goes beyond just caring about, whether there's enough clean water to drink. So I think it's very important that you educate yourself and ask questions. Don't be afraid to question, and don't be afraid to go deeply into, take a look. If you're listening to people giving an opposing point of view to yours, you need to take a look at that instead of immediately clamping down with a sort of a quasi-cultish adherence to whatever it is that you have been taught to believe is right.
Okay. Well, Rosa, this might be a slight tangent, but you're talking about the Hegelian dialectic, and you talked about the TPP agreement. Being here in Asia most of the time, I have wondered whether the TPP isn't really essentially a stalking horse to push, for example, the APEC agreement, because the TPP is so horrible that no country should join it. It's totally irrational. It's like asking all these smaller countries to attack China when China's their biggest trade partner, for example. It does a lot more than that, of course. It's an American corporate dictatorship. But there's no way they could ever agree to some of the terms in there, to the extent we can even know the terms, because 90% of it, of course, is secret.
Right.
But, when you look at the way it's presented in the news throughout Asia, let's say the Japanese papers or the Hong Kong papers, different places that I've been looking at, I think and then of course with Obama not attending with all this theater back in DC, you kind of get the feeling that this is really driving the alternative to TPP very fast and hard. And I guess we ought to remember that the APEC deal was originally what Clinton had wanted back in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, in other words, you got all these countries, including China, saying, we very much want this other thing that really, they wouldn't have so much enthusiasm for were it not for this suicidal and terrible TPP agreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's just something to keep in mind. I mean, a lot of people are totally hysterical about TPP. I'm just trying to, and I am too, but I'm just trying to say that looking at the reactions of the different countries in Asia, I think that what it may practically do is push everyone very quickly into alternatives. But that also leads to that corporate globalization.
Right. I think that's what's really interesting about it. With all these trade agreements, they take precedence. Domestic laws have to be conformed to trade agreements. So what that essentially, the goal really is harmonization of law. That's what the goal is. So regardless of what the whether they choose that, whether they make that choice or another choice, the point of these things is to have all of their laws harmonized and made uniform so that no individual nation can exclude the goods of another nation. So basically it will, what it's essentially going to do is kind of drag down production to kind of slow down economic, it equalizes the economies. And that's really the goal, because some of those nations will benefit, others will be damaged by it. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's particularly American hegemony. I would say it's global. This is big money, big corporations, and they think of themselves globally. They don't have, it's not about national allegiance. It's just about, if the firepower is bigger in one area than another, then they'll utilize that. But I don't think that there's any kind of a national allegiance in any aspect of this.
Oh, totally agreed. By the way, getting to the theme of, constructive ideas, are there any groups or movements or things that you think are particularly useful? Bring back the corporate death penalty or something. I don't know, but that I would like to see. That's my own personal pet hobby horse or whatever.
Yeah. Well, a corporation is just, a group of people, who come together and, have a set of essentially tax codes that regulate them. But what's happened is that they've been, in the United States, been given the rights of a person, an individual, in terms of being able to openly purchase elected officials. And okay, so so what can we do? As far as what we can do, there has been some legislation in the United States, in a couple of states, to outlaw Agenda 21. The problem with that, as I can see it, and that was signed into law in Alabama by the governor of Alabama. But the problem is that these things don't come called Agenda 21. So, the very next week, you can have a regional plan go through a county, something like, well, I'll give you an example of what's happening in terms of regionalization in the states. Is you have regional plans called the Power of 32, which is 32 counties, or One Bay Area, which is 9 counties and 101 cities. The idea is to merge these jurisdictions so that they're a single entity ultimately. And that, as I said, is the stepping stone to globalization. So outlaw Agenda 21 in a state, it's a cool idea, but really, unless you know that that regional plan is Agenda 21, then you're not really outlawing it. You're just, you're just making a law that, that is just there to satisfy a few people and maybe make them go home and think that they, that they're going to win. But I do think that people are becoming more aware when they're being manipulated. Students are beginning to question when they're being directed through social engineering and behavioral modification in their educational courses and sustainability. People are resisting the Rand Corporation mind control technique, the Delphi technique that's being used in public meetings throughout the United States. And I'm seeing just general unwillingness to go along to get along, which is really powerful. It's something that seems so simple, but that feeling that you might have when you're at a public meeting and your heart's beating really hard because you're about to stand up and speak and you really don't want to, and you're just stressed. And people don't want that, but more and more and more people are taking that, making that effort, and standing up and saying, this is wrong. I don't want to participate in this. I refuse to cooperate. I think that more and more people do recognize that, this is what it looks like. This is what a takeover looks like, and they're kicking ICLEI out of their cities. The International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. People are rejecting it. They're rejecting the National Defense Authorization Act. They're rejecting smart meters. People are refusing to cooperate. And this is essential. This is essential now. We must refuse to cooperate. If you don't have to give your personal information, refuse to collaborate. If you, there's nothing wrong with exposing those who are collaborating as well. Make wanted posters and put them up on phone poles. Show, name names, identify people who are cooperating with this plan, and refuse to to further them. You can also run for office yourself, if only to bring a light to what it is that's going on around us. This is something that's happening around the world. People are beginning now to really speak out.
You can see how the system is hierarchical, and this is all trickling down from the top. And I think things like state secession are a good place to start as well, to break away from the hierarchy.
I don't agree with you there. I think, I've spoken a lot in Texas. I really love Texas, and and Texans are great. I think we need Texas to stay in the union, because these are strong people who have something to say and are willing to speak up. I don't think that there's no Switzerland in this fight. You're not going to go and hide. You're not going to peel off and think you're going to start your own universe. This is something. It's treason. It's a worldwide totalitarian takeover. And the thing to do is to stand and fight. We're not going to go and hide somewhere, or even, the idea of secession in the United States is, it's a nice idea, but it's just not going to happen. So the thing to do is to take back your government, occupy your government.
Well, it's a hard thing to do when they've got all the money and all the guns.
Yeah, well, we got to do it. Hey, this is a war. This is war. And you've got to, you can't just give up. There's no point in it. If we give up, then we've lost.
Oolong.
If we give up, for sure we'll lose.
Sorry to interrupt there, Oolong. I think maybe I would say, from an American perspective, you're in Canada, but from an American perspective, the traumatic events of the American Civil War and all that, I think it kind of might be better to say more like occupy your county, or
occupy city.
Occupy your city kind of thing, because, in other words, kind of make it so that you're resisting and standing up to the system at a lower level than the state level, and not really so much secession. But anyway, that's just my view.
Yeah, well, I also want to say something else about that because of the Occupy movement. And, I use that term occupy, but I think my experience in going around the United States, I was on a speaking tour during the Occupy thing, and I went to many encampments, and what I saw were mainly people who really were not, didn't understand why they were there. They were being manipulated. They were not, they were mimicking whatever it was that the people who were leading them were telling them. And I was surprised. I didn't see an educated group of people who were dedicated to what they were doing. I saw kind of a sort of pseudo anarchy that I thought really fell down in what it could have been. And I was really interested because that was at the same time that people from the Tea Party, and I'm not talking about the organization of the Tea Party, I'm just talking about people who seemed to have nowhere else to go, who could object to what they saw going around in their government. Those people were beginning to really have power in government meetings to speak. They were speaking out, they were standing up, they were occupying the chambers of their local cities and counties and being very vocal. And that was when Occupy suddenly started camping out on lawns. And I thought that was very interesting. It was very interesting juxtaposition and very interesting how it came up at that time. And I really questioned it.
The problem is, though, it seems like every time these movements pop up, they end up co-opted. Like the Tea Party started out as a grassroots movement, and then it got co-opted into another wing of the Republican Party.
Right.
So how do we prevent that?
Yeah, well, people need to be stronger. They need to refuse to be sort of subsumed into that machine, and to differentiate themselves from it. I think, every one of us, no matter what group it is that you choose to affiliate yourself with, you have to remember that you're an individual and speak as an individual. Because consensus building is part of Agenda 21. It's about not standing out. It's about not objecting. It's about going along to get along. It's the antithesis to dissent. And that is not an educated populace. That's a group of sheep. So I think it's very important that people continually question and act according to what it is that their ethics tell them to do. And we need to look at our ethics as a people.
Just my 2 cents, but I would say that I think one of the things the Occupy movement failed on is they didn't really have any concrete demands. And I think we need to think about kind of some concrete ideas. I mentioned the corporate death penalty, but even if it's just something as obvious at a small level as bringing back Glass-Steagall or something, we kind of need like some general, people laugh when they hear about the 10 planks of the Communist Party and stuff like that, right? But there's nothing wrong with having an idea of here are 10 goals that unite us as a whatever it is you at the time are, a Tea Party or an Occupy or whatever, and then to generally shoot for them. And you won't get all of them, but you'll get in the right direction anyway. And it seemed to me that, like you were saying about the Occupy, they were just kind of not, I don't know how to put that. I would say they're there, but not there in a sense.
Yeah.
They knew something was wrong, but they didn't, I don't think they could really put their finger on what the problem or the solution was.
They were tools. They were being used just merely to occupy. They were being used to camp out across. What I also thought of when I was seeing this across the country, I was thinking these people are being used to train law enforcement. The militarization of our local law enforcement is really kicked into high gear. And that was something that, was an opportunity for a lot of law enforcement to be trained, sort of nationally on how to behave with a domestic force. And that's something else that we could get into that, but, there's something also to be concerned with the history of nations attacking their own people. And certainly the idea that with the militarization of our local police forces, that they're being inured to the consciousness of the people. And I see this all the time in public meetings where men with guns are coming in and ringing the walls of these public meetings, and they're police officers. And they are there at the behest of city councils and county supervisors in order to keep the people, those of us who have something to say, to keep us from saying it. And that is really, if you're looking for something to be active in, you're going to shock yourself if you start going down to your city and county meetings and take a look at what's going on there.
I think maybe the first step is for people just to stop being so afraid of everything. Stand up, and when the jackbooted thugs do come after you, then that exposes them, and that's almost a victory in itself.
Yeah, I think you don't have to look far. I mean, they're out there and they're waiting, But the thing is that I think it's really the time now. No one's holding a gun to your head now. If you think you're going to be brave later, forget it. This is your moment. This is the time for standing up, for being brave, for speaking out, for recognizing that, when you stare into that little glowing box all day long, whether it's in the palm of your hand or right 6 inches from your face, and you spend your life doing that instead of getting out and finding out what's happening locally around you in your town, you can easily be co-opted and pulled into Agenda 21 while thinking that you're fighting it. So you really need to be educated because there's a lot of manipulation, there's a lot of controlled opposition, and you need to understand what it is that you're fighting, or you'll end up fighting on the wrong side without knowing it.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at the Occupy movement, the slogan was, attacking the 1%. Well, the 1%, I mean, that includes your dentist, your doctor. As far as I'm concerned, they're not the problem. The problem is the 0.0001% that sort of rule everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it's really important to look at what the corporatocracy is. These are the huge, I'm talking about enormous mega corporations, multinational corporations that have subsumed everything into themselves and are destroying any competition. And, this is how our control of our water is being taken over, our land, our personal freedoms are being restricted, our cities are being rebuilt and controlled, and this is through major corporatization. Low-income housing is a corporate model. It's designed to, this is about privatization of governance and government and transfer of money to large corporations. And I was just giving an example with low-income housing, how that's being designed and built by major corporations now with subsidies from your taxes in order to build smart growth so that you can be moved into high density developments in the center of your town and cleared out of your rural areas. This is the goal of Agenda 21, to get you into the major cities so that these mega regions can then be governed more efficiently.
Well, there's another thing with this. Talking about ideas to make things better, I think one power we do have is our money. Now, they have a lot more, but still, if we don't spend it on evil corporations or what have you, that would be quite a start. And then there are also a lot of things that you can essentially make or grow yourself. I mean, there's a guy named Tony Cartolucci, has a weblog, landdestroyer.blogspot. Has all kinds of great ideas and information on groups and things about how you can try to opt out of the corporate grid, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I think we should be focused on is, by the way, back to the thing you're talking about, getting rid of, not watching TV in and of itself might do wonders. I gave that up like 30 years ago or something. I just couldn't stand it anymore.
It's good to watch fan, though. You want to watch your government at work. That's very important.
I know, but nowadays you've got it on the internet. People can show you selected clips and what have you. But anyway, the idea is these boycotts and boycotts. In other words, support good companies, usually small and local, and then just don't do business with the big boys. And that will go far. I'm not, no illusions here. I mean, we're watching a Nazi takeover. I mean, One of the top Nazi bankers after World War II essentially said that. He said, "We screwed up. We did things too quickly using too much force. Next time we're going to do it through economic means."
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember if that was Hjalmar Schacht or it was like the head of another head of their bank. But the point is that's what they've done. Look at the EU. It's like you know, Germany and its allies to some extent, like let's say France, totally destroying Portugal or Greece or whatever. It's they're achieving now what they couldn't do in World War II.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, this is the extension of that Nazi plan and the Stalinist plan to basically absorb everything, and that is what a totalitarian state is. It's to, the goal, and that's why this is so phenomenal, is because it is really it's so powerful because it has that green smiley face on it, and it's very seductive. Even thinking you're going to grow your own food. I mean, you can easily fall into kind of an Agenda 21 plan where you have sort of that concept that you're going to create this utopian dream, which is great, obviously great. But if you don't have land use plans and water and ability to get water inexpensively so that you can grow that food, then you can't get your goods to market, or your barter system is impossible to have because you've got government bearing down on you through data collection and information sharing. You can't separate these things. So I think it's great to withhold your money. I've always been in favor of general boycott. I think it's great. General strike, boycott, very important. But generally, it's very difficult to get people to do it and do it all together. But when it does happen, it's very powerful. But you need to educate yourself, so you want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. You're really focusing on the right wrong people. So you can't go wrong with the major corporations. And I say that that you can look at the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, Monsanto, DuPont. They're all in there, the biggies. That's who's pushing sustainable development.
Well, they're also pushing all the wars. If you look at the totally corrupted human rights organizations now, or green organizations that support every war, look at the top 5 or 10 donors. It's all the same. It's a complex now that's far more than the military-industrial complex used to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the war now includes, part of the prep is the human rights and the environmental and the other kinds of rights, right?
Yes.
And it's a bit of a joke because it's like sometimes American allies are the worst places of them all, right? So how can you justify what you're doing when your buddies are the ones you ought to be attacking first? But that's for sure. It's not going to be easy. But nobody said it was going to be easy. I mean, I had lived in Portland for a number of years, Portland, Oregon, and they have all these great farmers markets all over. I mean, like practically 5 a day, 7 days a week. And of course, they're starting to be limited, and they're going after the farmers more and more. And you can see that this is not going to be an easy road. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, in the scheme of things, the hardest part was to get people interested in them in the first place, right? I mean, in that area, they've made the successful trip to the point where a large percentage of people do not really want to shop at the supermarket.
Mm-hmm. That's great, but you've also got tremendous gentrification in Portland, and
True.
And that's what's happened there and that is a direct result of smart growth and Agenda 21. So, and this is something that is an essential piece of Agenda 21, and that is the non-governmental organizations and foundations are partnering with government and corporations. So as you were saying, the foundations, the major corporate foundations are funding the nonprofits, and then the nonprofits are suing or pressuring government. And so you have this sort of cycle and circle that ends up recreating government policy, redesigning government, and essentially anything, when you sort of thought that you were going to have your nice little farmers market and everybody, is going to be supporting the local farmer, and the local farmer is unable to continue in business because their water meters are being put onto their wells. They're being restricted in their use of their land. Setbacks from creeks and streams have eaten up acres of their property. Under sustainable development, tillage is considered to be unsustainable. Livestock is considered to be unsustainable, too many greenhouse gas emissions. And, so there's so many elements of it that you might think that you're supporting sustainable development. You might think it's really great, but in fact, it's destroying you.
Well, no surprise on that end. We know they're coming after us with everything, really. Kind of stepping aside from that, what are you working on now? Is there a new book in the works? Any video? What is your thinking going forward, I guess? So we have an idea what you've been working on since you got into this. What is your thinking now, or what you're working on?
Well, I've been very interested to see what's been going on all around the United States and around the world. And my next book is going to be on what responses we're seeing around the world, what people are doing, how they're fighting back, ideas. Because when I go around the country and people recognize that something is wrong and they don't know what to do. So I'm not a person who's directing people. What I'm doing is helping people see that there is something going on and expanding that awareness. So what I want to do is just assist people in seeing that they're not alone and that there is a fight going on all across the world. It's nonpartisan, it's grassroots, and people are working together and educating each other in whether it is that they're electing local people to office that will listen to them instead of people who turn a blind eye, people who have guts, who have courage, farmers, people who go out and stand strong with a farmer who's losing their property because of setback restrictions, people who are going back and fighting against planning departments and who are, talking about taking planners out in handcuffs for restrictive, putative issues that are impacting landowners. So that's what I'm planning to write about.
Well, that sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, I guess we get back to the idea of what we think is working. And so if something is working, I don't know where, in India, maybe it will work in the U.S., possibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, hopefully. I mean, the thing is, it's big, standardization of systems. And that, as I said, one thing you can do is withhold your cooperation. And this is, goes further than boycott. It's, do you have to be on Facebook? Do you need to have that smartphone? Is that something that's essential to your life? And ask yourself, how did you live without it? Can you live without it again? Can you live without giving voluntarily your private information to not just the government, but any other user of that information? Can you live without it? And ask yourself, if you're answering no, then ask yourself why.
Well, that's a good point. I think people have been bought off with creature comforts,
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, the U.S. is a lot worse than it used to be. It's gone downhill in many ways for many decades. But you get a faster, microwave oven and people, shut up about all the problems kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think I'm seeing, especially parents with Common Core, which is Agenda 21. It doesn't matter what they call it in your area. Any standardization of educational curricula is Agenda 21 because it's standardization of systems. So a lot of parents are fighting this. Doctors and nurses are fighting the digitization of your health records. I think that rather than seeing this as a negative thing, the fighting against something, you can see that you're fighting for your individual privacy, the ownership of your own DNA, and the willingness that you have to identify yourself as an individual and to recognize that freedom really starts inside of you. And that's a commitment that you have to yourself. And to, don't have to think about future generations, just think about your commitment to yourself as a human being, as an individual of integrity, and how it is that you won't, be seduced by some piece of technology into losing what it is that makes you a human being.
Good point. Good point. One other thing is, in terms of resources for people, let's say people are getting interested in this or they're new to the field, are there any videos or documentaries that you could recommend?
Well,
obviously we have your book. I understand that, but
yeah.
a lot of people are visual, and it actually works a little better when you can see how they shaft a rural area and talk. You know what I mean? The visual effect is stronger.
Yeah, that's great, and I really, I really enjoy, myself, watching film, and I think you can learn a lot from, putting these things together. Of course, I have a lot there. If you just put my name into YouTube, you're going to come up with a lot of video, and we have a series of videos called Near Riot at Delphi Meeting. Those are very interesting to see how government meetings are falling apart now, where the government is manipulating and actually creating manufactured consensus, and how we fought against it. Also, I can suggest for people who just want to watch just a real coherent linear explanation of what Agenda 21 is and how it is being implemented in your town. You can watch any one of the many of my talks that are on Agenda 21 on YouTube and also on our websites. And then there are, of course, others as well. Whatever, you just start cruising through that and looking at at YouTube, and you'll find a lot of information there, a lot of great visuals and tremendous information. The best thing you can do is educate yourself. You can't argue against this credibly with people unless you know what you're talking about. It's pretty basic to just educate yourself first and then get out there and educate others.
Yes, for sure, for sure. By the way, I'm just curious because I lived in the Silicon Valley a long time. Can you give a concrete example or two of how the San Francisco Bay Area has been manipulated by all of this, let's say in the last 20 years?
Well, I can, bring it right down to right at this moment. We're suing to stop the biggest regional plan in the entire United States, the most restrictive. This is called One Bay Area, and it's just one of many regional plans all across the country that are designed to harmonize. And that's a nice sounding term, but really what it means is completely standardize and remove all jurisdictional boundaries around the Bay Area. Okay, so you're from the Bay Area. It's all 9 counties and 101 cities. And the idea is that what they're doing now, they have passed this, and the only thing that's stopping it from going into effect is going to be our lawsuit. What they're doing is they're saying that 100% of all development that's outside of a specific, very narrow 4% of the San Francisco Bay Area, 100% of the development really has to be right in those tightly restricted areas. And 80% of all new residential has to be in 4% of the San Francisco Bay Area. And 66% of all new commercial has to be in those areas too. So what we're talking about is very tightly packed urban areas, much more tightly packed than they are now. And any land that's outside of those very narrow areas cannot be developed. That is going to have a tremendous impact on the property rights of millions of people. And also, the ability to govern. It's going to have a tremendous impact. And so that's going on. Not only that, but redevelopment is an issue that people don't really understand, but it's where your property can be taken and given to another individual by your government against your will. And you get paid for it, but you have nothing to say about that. That's happening all across the country. But in California, we stopped it. We did a lawsuit against it here in California. And during that period of time, it ended, but they're bringing it back. So this is a way to fund this plan. Your money is paying for these plans that are actually taking away your rights. And of course, people are losing their. One of the last jobs I did was a 1,000-acre ranch. I appraised it, and a neighboring property. It taken them 10 years to get the permits to put one house on their 1,000 acres. So this is what you're looking at across the country, is that people aren't able to use their property. And then it becomes valueless, and then the government can take it for nothing.
For nothing. A question, that property with 10 acres that got one house, what was it zoned for?
That was rural. It was actually rural residential property, 1,000 acres, and they wanted. A lot of times what happens in these areas is you have a farmer who has kids who want to have a house. They want to put a house up on the same property as their parents so they can ranch or farm. And they're only allowed to have one house on that property, regardless of how many acres it is. So, this one particular property, it took 10 years to get the permits. Imagine the amount of money they spent, and the attorney's fees and the planner fees and all of that, and numbers of people who had their hand out along the way. This is a full employment act for planners, for consultants, for attorneys. These are people who are making a lot of money off of these Agenda 21 plans.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine went to school at, I guess it was Portland State, but it was in Portland. And it was kind of at the beginning of this whole idea of these planners and regionalization and all that back in the 1970s, I guess the early 70s. And he's just disgusted at how they became so totalitarian so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
They created a regional system in the Portland area. And again, like you're saying, they now just take stuff in order to develop it, right?
Yeah.
They don't take stuff to protect it. They take it to make a profit for their friends. And then they retire early and go work for the big builders who are in on the racket. And it's really quite depressing. And I think a lot of it actually even started in Portland. I think that was the big, at least it was hyped that way. And I guess they took the mayor and he joined the Carter administration and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But
Portland, Seattle. A lot
sure.
of Portland and Seattle, yeah, that's true. And that's that little storyline of being in the government, making policy, and then leaving government and going to work for the corporations that benefited from that policy making. And then the next step, of course, is to leave the corporation, go back into government, continue to make law, and then go back out again. This is, the revolving door of, there's, of course, within this plan, it's fully dependent on corruption, but that is not the end game. The end game of the plan, ultimately, these are people who are being used and their personal greed is being exploited. But ultimately, the goal is erasure of all boundaries, of all national, of course, all local boundaries, and ultimately a completely easily governable, totally efficient system. When you see that term efficiency or resilience, what you're looking at there is Agenda 21. Some of the terms, you want to check out, look for, besides sustainable development, you're going to see, the demolition of neighborhoods. You'll see transit-oriented development and traffic calming and wetland misidentification, sustainable community strategies, scenic byways, form-based codes, regionalization. A lot of these plans come called Vision 2035 or Your Town 2050. That's what it looks like when it's in your town. These are the things to look for. So, of course, it seems like it's going to be cool, but it might start out looking good. But eventually, the goal is to pack as many people into as small an area as possible and to establish mega regions instead of individual states, counties, and cities. And that is happening. We are seeing that happening right now, and it's happening across the world.
By the way, in that Bay Area plan, does it include creating a Bay Area authority?
What we have are across the United States, we have 500 metropolitan planning organizations. Those are federally mandated and federally funded. So we have that already. It's the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. That's what it's called in the San Francisco Bay Area, and Association of Bay Area Governments. And together, that is the authority. They have created the plan and they are managing it. These are unelected boards. They're made up of elected officials, but the boards themselves are unelected by the people. And so they have full capability of governance and the ability to implement and pressure the acceptance of their plans, but that you can't vote them out. You can't get rid of these boards. So, and this is these boards are in place all across the United States. So that's the governing body in the Bay Area.
Do they have lots of employees?
They do. Mm-hmm.
The reason I ask is I'm a little bit familiar with the Portland system, where they created a metro kind of system that can, includes whatever, 3 or 4 counties or what have you. But the real thing is it controls what gets developed and what doesn't.
Yeah.
By lines, it just says, this particular area you can develop the hell out of, and this area you can't touch. And of course, your property might even straddle it. I mean, it's very arbitrary and totally evil because they don't buy your property. They just tell you what you can do with it.
Right. It's winners and losers. It's the Nazi plan. That was what the Nazi land use philosophy was under Hitler in 1933. Ernst Huber said, you can continue to own your property, but you have to use it. You have to do with it what we tell you to do, and you have to use it for the common good. And that's, you can be instantly impoverished by simply some bureaucrat in an office just changing a line. And that's what's happening all across the country.
Well, this begs the question, if there are so many victims of this, like there are in the Portland area, I would think there would be organizations that are whatever you want to call it, rural rights organizations or stuff like that. And isn't that forming?
Yeah, there are. There are different groups. There are, property alliance groups, different groups all across the country. The thing that is interesting is that so much of this happens, to a single individual, to a single business. And people are, busy in their lives. They don't realize that this stuff is happening, not just to them, but to others as well. And so, for instance, in the Pacific Northwest, there's a group called Citizens Alliance for Property Rights, which has been active and very active in the Washington State area in fighting back against the misidentification of wetlands that's victimizing property owners. I've seen this in Florida, Texas. But what it is that a lot of times these people are being labeled. Of course, they get labeled by the government as being anti-government. I've been labeled anti-government while I was working for a government agency, which I thought was pretty funny. Basically, any attack the government can use against you to get you to shut up, they will. And people are afraid when you're about to lose a property. You're not it takes quite a bit to get you to get out there and get vocal, because you're afraid. You don't know whether you should be just trying to make nice with them and mollify the government so it'll go away. People are just literally paralyzed. They're losing everything they have. Oftentimes they're going through foreclosure, bankruptcy, and they're being destroyed by these plans. But that's one thing that we have been doing across the country, is helping people to find their voice about this, and also in the Bay Area, bringing a major lawsuit against it, so that, and there's over 7 million people here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and very, very few people even know this happened. They don't even know it's going on, because the more people who live in a high-density city center, the less people own land, and the less they know that, and the less they care that someone who does own something is losing it.
Well, that's the problem. That's their strategy, of course, is the victims don't know that they're not alone.
Right. Yeah.
But I would think now, with alternative media all over the place, that and this plan being not so new anymore, it's now getting kind of old. It's been at least 20 years. I mean, I think I heard of Agenda 21 at least 20 years ago. I mean, I don't. It's been a while, I mean, so I would think that now it would be gaining traction. I mean, that just. I mean, the alternative media is gaining in numbers every day. So
that's true, and obviously, I mean, it was agreed to in 1992, so it's just over 20 years. Last year was the 20th anniversary, and at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, was the 20th anniversary of Agenda 21, and was the goal was to bring more non-governmental organizations into contact with corporations and governments. Yes, it's it's certainly no secret at this point, but if you start speaking out about it, as I did, you're going to be vilified. You'll be attacked in the press, the mainstream press. I have an interesting interview with the Huffington Post that I did, where I actually videoed my interview so that people could hear the interview and then see what was written afterwards. People who talk about Agenda 21 are attacked as conspiracy theorists. And this is a conspiracy, but it's not a theory. This is a fact. And it's a crazy plan, but I'm not crazy. The plan is. And people who talk about it are shamed. They're named as they're called every name that you can think of. And of course, they're smeared as being right-wing. I personally am a liberal. And that in itself, I think, is really upsetting to a lot of people who are on the left, because it's very easy to just reject people if you think that they're on the other end of the political spectrum and you don't need to listen to what they're saying. But hearing someone who's a lifelong liberal registered Democrat talking about this has really upset the Democratic Party. And I've been attacked by the Democratic Party as being a fake Democrat. And so my point in talking about this is saying that, yes, you would think that there would be a lot more vocalization about this, but your mainstream media is owned by 5 megacorporations, and this information, there is a purposeful lid on all of this information. This is a bloodless coup d'etat. This is an administrative coup d'etat. And as long as they can keep the lid on it and refuse to acknowledge that it's going on and marginalize people who are speaking about it, then they're winning. So that's what it looks like.
Well, on the bright side, again, you only get flack when you're over the target. So if the Huffington Post is against you, I take that as a good sign, because, look, they're owned by the big corporations. Let's be honest about it.
I know.
They're not new media. They're just new marketing.
Yeah, no, this is just the entertainment industry. But
yeah, exactly. And that doesn't mean they're all bad. I'm just trying to say, come on, let's be realistic.
No, they're all bad, honey. They are.
I know.
And we're talking about, they are the mouthpiece for Agenda 21. And I've done a few of these when I do these hostile interviews, like with Reuters and the American Bar Association, I always film them. And then I post them to YouTube and to our website so that people can get a look at what happens when you do an interview with Reuters or with the American Bar Association, and then you read the article that they write after that. These are deliberate smears, and they are producing these in order to keep people from looking into this any more fully. That's the way the game is played. And without alternative so-called media like you, we would not be able to get this information out to the people. But once you hear this information, you got to take this ball and run with it. You can't just think that some person on a white horse is going to ride up and rescue you. That's just not going to be happening.
Well, for sure, but you've done yeoman service, so we at least are in the fight, I think. I mean, look, this global corporate dictatorship that they are working on is not. I mean, they've been working on it a long time, and it includes everything: GM Foods, Codex Alimentarius. It includes a whole bunch of things. But I think it's so aggressive and so all-encompassing that it's basically going to eventually force everyone to resist. I mean, because it's at some point, like let's say you're into natural medicine. Well, they want that done. Let's say you're into anything rural, or, well, they want that banned or outlawed or stolen or whatever. You know what I mean? At some point, the victims will outnumber the non-victims.
I know, but we're really I hate to say that we're in the end game, but this really is what it looks like. And, if you would think that by now we'd reach that point, but see, people don't recognize, this is why you have to name it. Agenda 21 Sustainable Development. That's what it is. And if you go up against it as Codex Alimentarius, or as smart meters, or the smart grid, or as Common Core, or as your scenic byway, or whatever it is that they're imposing on your area, and you don't recognize that these are all part of the same thing, you won't be actually fighting it. Because the thing is imposed all of a piece. This is a total takeover. So they get people fighting each other when they're both on the same side, and that's what's really stunning about the effectiveness of the implementation of Agenda 21, is how people who should be working together against it are actually ending up fighting each other because they just happen to identify with one or another political party. And this is part of how they destroy our cohesiveness as free people.
Well, that's as old as the hills, divide and rule. Mm-hmm. What I can say is I'm originally from D.C., and I know that a lot of the characters you see on TV who pretend to be enemies of the other party are not. Mm-hmm. And a perfect example of that was Carville's Marriage, right, where he's a big-shot Democratic operative and his wife is a big-shot Republican operative.
Yeah, funny.
If that doesn't tell you the truth of it, then what will? I mean, these guys are in on it together, and they laugh at everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. And one thing I've been really encouraged by is looking at how quickly people are able to discern what the real story is now. I mean, look how long it took for a lot of people to understand what happened, or at least get a sense of what happened in 9/11. Now I think people are, a lot are more quickly able to discern what the real story is. And that, is thanks to alternative media. It's obviously thanks to the ability that we have to communicate with each other through technology. And I guess it's a race to determine whether the technology is going to own us, as it does seem, or whether we are going to be able to use it to free ourselves. But at this point, I really think that, old school walking flyers around to your neighbors We have flyers on our websites. You can print them out, take them to a printer and make 100 and walk them around your neighborhood. It costs you like $5. It's a two-sided flyer. Go and do that and get that information out to people. This is how you, send, maybe tweet, all of our information to your friends right now so that you can get more and more people involved in this. Because unless they understand that there's a full plan behind globalization, that it involves your educational system, your food, your transportation, your land use, your energy, your water, every aspect of your life, unless you see how it impacts you, you're going to think it's out there in the future somewhere and not going to recognize that it's right there in your town, wherever it is you're living.
By the way, before we wrap it up, I had one last question. With the original Agenda 21, UN-type meetings and everything, did it include these other things as subsets, like, Codex Alimentarius, that kind of thing?
No, that's Codex Alimentarius is not expressly in the United Nations Agenda 21 document, which is a 300-page, 40-chapter book. You can get that as a download if you want to look at it, but don't forget, it in itself is a green mask. So a lot of it appears to be really nice and, oh, isn't this cool? Who wouldn't want clean air and clean water? But the essential element of Agenda 21 that runs through it is data collection and data sharing, and something called capacity building. So if you look at it as a corporate model, what you're looking at there is the ability to grow markets, collapse more developed markets, and basically make the developed markets level out. And also, it's a design to capture all of the information in the world and then share it through law enforcement, through international treaties and agreements, and through non-governmental organizations. So that's essentially what it is. And yes, Codex is part of it as a control on food and supplement production.
Well, based on what you just said then, in a sense, if their highest goal is data manipulation and ownership, then that should, I guess you would say, be our highest goal, is to prevent that.
Right.
Other than exposing them and otherwise defeating them. But I mean, so I guess that raises the issue of how we might go about doing that. Like, so instead of buying something that's smart meter friendly, then you want to buy something that isn't, as an example.
Well, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because appliances, all new appliances are rolled out with a chip in them, a smart chip that responds to a smart meter, and they literally talk to each other back and forth. That means that your appliances can be shut off remotely, as well as your meter, without anyone coming onto your property. Something that's happening in California several years ago, all old cars they had a cash for clunkers or something like that program, where if you had an old vehicle, you could turn it in to the DMV or whatever, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and they would pay you for it, just give you some money for it. Well, apparently that plan is it's being planned for old appliances. And I have heard, I haven't confirmed this personally, but I've heard that old appliances are being purchased and then crushed at resale places. The idea is that you won't be able to get an appliance that doesn't have smart meter capability and that can run without smart meter capability. So, creative reuse and repair, teaching yourself to repair things, being able to resist. If you can, if you're using Facebook and you're using it as a tool, I can understand it, but I personally don't have a Facebook account and I don't have a smartphone. It's my one small way of resisting. I don't have a biometrics passport, and I'm getting very concerned about when I'm going to have to get a new passport. I think you want to fight if you can. You want to join together with others who are fighting the voluntary turning over of your personal information to a huge government corporate combine.
Well, okay,
So,
thanks. I have one last question then.
okay.
So last time I visited the States, I stayed with a friend, and his house had been victimized by the smart meter attack.
Mm-hmm.
And when he wasn't there or he was asleep or whatever, they snuck in, went around the hedges and all that, and they stuck it on the side of the house. Um, do you know, is there anything people can do about that?
Well, here in California, we have fought the Public Utilities Commission, and they have created a program here, an opt-out program. Now, what we've demanded is that, and I did have a smart meter on my house that was put on, right? Smart meters put on my gas and electric without my consent, and then we demanded that they come back and get them, and they did, and they replaced them with analog meters. But that was through a lot of struggle and fighting over it. And now we pay an extra amount every month to keep, so it's presumably so that someone can come out and read our meter. But so that's what you want to do. You want to fight it. But then I'll tell you, my neighbor has allowed them to put the smart meter on or didn't object. And I went over and I asked him, I said, I'm willing to pay. I'll pay the fee for you for a year, and I'll pay it in perpetuity while I'm here anyway. If you just, have them come and get the meter off of your house, and he wouldn't do it. So, even after being educated about it, he still wouldn't do it. So the thing is, too, is that we have, there are, everyone's wanting 4G, they want 5G, they want, why is it that I can't communicate? Why do I have why am I getting dropped here or there? So, you're demanding what corporations and government want to give you, which is full surveillance on you. If I was to tell you that the government was going to force you to carry a device with you at all times that identifies where you are, what you're thinking, what you're doing, I'm sure you would say, no way I'm going to do that. But yet you carry around your smartphone, which is a GPS device, and you're on Facebook all day long. So you're voluntarily giving up your freedom, and all they're doing, they dangle this stuff out there for you. But on the smart meters, you can fight, and people need to get together and join with others who are fighting it. And there are groups all over all over the world who are resisting and fighting and demand that they remove that meter from your house.
Well, in the case of my friend, it looks like it's going to be a tough fight because they want to wear you down is the problem. So you send letters and,
What state is he in?
Oregon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there are others there who are fighting it. And I suggest that, that people, find those groups and then join with them.
Well, they're working on it. But again, it's that same thing with the rural people. They don't know where to turn, I think, is one of the problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to go and really kind of take over your Public Utilities Commission and just, demand it. If you're, an angry horde day after day after day, they are going to respond. And, whether it's the most verbal people who get, the action. This is one thing that you're seeing more and more of, though, is that they are bringing in police to meetings. So it's not, it's not quite as easy as it used to be vocal in a meeting now, because you really have to be concerned with possibly being arrested. But that's a perfect First Amendment right. So I think people need to test that and need to be active. Don't be afraid. This is, if you're afraid now, what's going to happen when it's really coming down? This is not the time to be afraid.
Well, you got that right. Well, on those positive notes,
Rich.
I think we could wrap it up about here and just repeat your website and the title of your book and call it a day.
All right, that sounds great. My name is Rosa Koire, and my last name is Koire. The book is Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21, and the websites postsustainabilityinstitute.org and Democrats Against UN Agenda 21.com. And we've got flyers on those websites for you. You can print one out, take it to your printer, and make 100 or 1,000. There are many hundreds of thousands that have gone out around the world. Make them, pass them out to people, drop them on doorsteps, and get this information out. You can do it.
Well, again, thank you so much for your efforts in this fight. We do appreciate it. It's really, it's the, what can we say, the tip of the spear of the global dictatorship here we're talking about. So if we don't stop it now, as you said, it's just going to be far worse in 5 years. So we got to fight.
That's it.
Well, thank you so much, Rosa. We really appreciate you coming. So we wish you the best, and we're looking forward to hearing more and seeing your books and videos and such. And so we really appreciate you coming. So thanks much.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rosa.
Okay, take care. See you next week. Bye-bye.